Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now make it 6 o'clock if we could start the meeting. And again, just a initial warning: if people don't want to be filmed, if they could please let the committee clerk know, because it will be broadcast over the internet, the meeting. Thank you. If we move on to the agenda, apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillors Gloucester and Holbein.
And I've got apologies for Councillor Fida Hussain. The next item is urgent business. I've received no notification of any urgent business. Declarations of interest. Has any members got any declarations to make? No, thank you. Public question time.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated. Has anybody got any comments on them? No, thank you. Right, if we could then move on to the first application, which is land at Snipe Clough, Oldham, which is quite a comprehensive application. I'll ask, is it Mr. Dickman to introduce the item?
Right, thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me? It's just obviously I'll be speaking to this screen, so looking that way, so please let me know if I go a bit silent along the way. As the Chair has said, this is quite a comprehensive application, and what's important to understand from the beginning is that in assessing the proposals we need to look at it in that comprehensive style. So there's lots of very individual elements to it, but overall the justification for the development rests on the scheme taken as a whole. So this is a site members obviously I'm sure will be well aware of, just outside the town centre, just to the southeast of the town centre, beyond Alexandra Park, so just off Kings Road down to Alexandra Park. That's the main access way of getting into the site. It's then obviously quite an extensive area, much of that a little bit formalised, some playing fields that are formally laid out down there, but generally quite informal with footpaths and other areas of greenery on the site. Again, this is giving you the site, so obviously in the centre, the photograph, quite, as I say, quite an extensive area around the site which extends right up to Netherhay Street, which is obviously part of the proposals.
Graham, speak for that.
Right. So again, this is just giving you an indication of the actual red line, the site boundary of the site, and obviously the extensive nature of that. The other way around. So these are the various proposals. Obviously you had the opportunity to have a look at these online, because obviously this is quite a detailed drawing, covers quite a wide area, but sets out the various elements of the scheme, and I'll run through those individually and point out where those are. These are effectively showing development boundaries, and these are related to some extent to the phasing that's intended that the development will be undertaken under. So for instance, the green area in the centre of the site, which includes a number of elements, the visitor centre, a growing hub, what we call the northern growing hub, will come forward as one of the first phases of the development going forward. So as you come in the site, as I say, the main entrance, certainly the only main entrance for vehicles, is off Kings Road. There's an existing public car park there at the entrance to the site. Some alterations to that area, to the highway in that location, will need to be implemented as part of the scheme, and you'll note there is a condition that relates to that as part of the officer recommendation. And this area, known as I understand as the tip road that runs through the site, so this is the main route that people use, but there are a number of separate formal and informal footpath and footway routes elsewhere in the site. So we start with the first element of the site. So if you go to the top right hand corner and try to give an indication roughly of where this is in the context of the overall site. So this is the visitor centre, which is one of the main hub buildings that are being proposed on the site. This is this structure towards the southern end of this group. That will then link in with an event space, which is a smaller structure and the site and some other outdoor areas within that. So it all fits together as a single entity. Again, you'll see some of the green there indicates the trees that are there on site at the moment, and the siting has been designed in order to avoid large-scale loss of trees in those areas and making best use.
Switches underneath and switch that off.
Oh. Whatever, no? Yes. Is that any better? Different? Yeah. So as I say, these areas taken together, so that's the first part of the development. I'll come on also to the Forestry Depot, which is in the same area of the site and is also proposed to come forward as part of the first phase. So this is the area at the moment, and the main visitor centre building will be on the edge of the wooded area within sort of partial cleared areas of the site, trying to avoid any loss of the more mature trees. So you can see it's a very architecturally well designed building. It's designed both for energy efficiency but also to fit into its setting, become very efficient. These are just a smaller scale version of that and shows you the shape of the site and how it fits round. So obviously there'll be a cafe involved in this as well, which then links back to some of the growing hubs on the site and making use of that produce locally. So there's no major food miles involved in this, and also obviously allowing people to get the experience of consuming food that has been grown locally. These are just some indicative views, again giving you the indication of the type of structure that is being proposed and how that will fit into its setting on the site. So again, you know, it looks quite a large building, but in the context of its surroundings it should be able to fit in quite nicely. The Forestry Depot, slightly different, just up, as I say, up at the top of the site. This is more straightforward, functional building on the site, but is deemed to be important in order to provide for the day-to-day management of the site and for the other facilities to be looked after. So this again forms part of the proposal. The second main built development element of the site is the learning centre, and this is at the opposite end of the site, right at the southern tip. For anybody who knows the area, it's where the tip road itself then veers off towards Furness Avenue, which should be notable to members from a couple of committees ago, because we dealt with the bike hub, which again is a linked leisure outdoor proposal, and that's just down that area of the site. So again, this fits in there. This has its own car parking area we provided next to the site. Again, there's been some elements here of ash dieback in these areas. The trees have already been removed, so again the siting has been looked at to fit in with the landscape in the area. It will nevertheless be a very prominent building from within the site. So whereas the visitor centre is a bit niche in its location, this is on one of the main routes through the site that people use.
Right. Just be aware that the speakers aren't working properly, so speak as loud as you can.
Right, okay. Is there a bit, particularly on the members, are you able to hear? Are you having a...
I think it's the public that can't.
Oh, right, sorry. Oh, you can't hear at all?
The speakers are not working properly, so...
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Well, as I say, I'll try without shouting. As I said to colleagues earlier on, I have hearing aids in as well, which I don't normally wear for this, so it's very, very loud for me if I shout. So again, this is important because this is, as I say, this is quite a prominent building that's going to be located on the site, but is a fundamental part of the overall aim of putting learning opportunities, getting people in the urban area, particularly in the deprived urban areas, which are located in the immediate vicinity of the site, providing them with facilities for learning that are not just school, urban based, but actually relate directly to that experience of the more outdoor environment and of nature itself. So as I say, you can see this is quite a prominent building, but again, designed in a way that it becomes a feature on the site rather than a visual intrusion. Next element of the site, again this one is over more to the northeast of the site. This is playing field, well I say playing fields, this is fields at the moment on the site. Part of this area will be put forward for a solar array. Again, this is one of the elements, oops, this is one of the elements due to funding that will come forward in one of the early phases of the site. Again, this will provide both energy sources for the development itself, so again it becomes a very efficient arrangement, but obviously some of the additional generation from this will go forward to the grid and obviously provide then some potential income back in to the site itself. This is giving you an indication of this area, and perhaps at this point it's probably worth moving on to one of the three main elements that have been of an issue with the site. So there are three elements to this. One is the whole site is in the green belt. So quite clearly there is an aspect there of, is this appropriate development or not? The second element, and I'll just touch on this one now while we're looking at this area, is the playing fields. And there is an objection, as you will see, on the application from Sport England, who do not consider that the proposals provide adequate replacement for existing playing fields in the site itself. Now there's a disagreement between the applicant and Sport England as to how you interpret that, as to whether that means playing fields means formal fields that are lined out, fields that can actually be the rented out areas of the site, or whether it relates to fields that, for instance, these areas of the site, you know, you could come along, kick a ball about, it's still a playing field. It's not in formal use, and the condition of the site may not now be appropriate for those games, and obviously providing people with those opportunities for team sports and so forth. So Sport England have raised objection to that element of the site. As a result of that, under the direction, it is required to be referred to the Secretary of State. So if members today do decide that they're in favour of the application, it will not be a decision that can be made today. The importance of the stance that's been taken by the applicant here is that, again, to bring the scheme forward, it's not possible for the replacement playing fields to be created in advance of the loss of part of this area of the site. What we have retained is that they're in what is termed the southern section of playing, or a southern hub, which is the new growing hub, and next to that existing playing fields, they will not be lost. So that area of the site is going to be retained. So part of the existing playing field options, they'll be retained until the new fields come forward. Part of it, however, will be lost. So there will be a period where there will be a temporary loss overall of playing fields. However, we have to look at this in the context of sport and recreation. And Sport England have made quite clear that their remit is about playing fields. So what they're interested in is the playing fields. They do, however, say, we recognise there will be recreational opportunities. So part of the growing hub, part of the area that will replace this part of the site, is a recreational facility. It provides food as well. It's obviously got a horticultural element to it, but ultimately it's recreation, and it's about training and learning and teaching people about how to grow food in a way that people, particularly in the local area, wouldn't have that opportunity before. So members have to look at that as an element, as a justification. The applicant was quite clear that if, as was recommended on a condition when we deferred from the last meeting to require the new playing fields to come forward, it would have absolutely significant implications for the funding and bringing forward the overall scheme. So that's what we have to lay out. It's not ideal from that perspective, but as I say, lots of things are not ideal. The overall benefit in the long term of bringing the scheme forward, and of course the new playing fields, they are proposed. It will come forward as a later phase of the development, but overall the benefits that will accrue from allowing the development based on the provisions of the conditions that we're recommending, we consider and we agree with the applicant would override any harm in terms of playing field provision. Swimming pond, this is an area of the site which again, as everybody knows from the news, you know, outdoor swimming, it's become quite popular, kind of natural swimming elements to that. There is an existing water body on the site, which is the area to the top, so the top side of that. So that already exists. That's not a managed facility in any way, but of course, as we know, when it's hot and the kids decide they want to go for a dip, you know, they can already do that. What will be provided in this scheme is a new facility alongside it, and that will be designed in ways that obviously has regard to health and safety criteria for that. So obviously safety facilities and so forth will be provided around that area of the site. That's part of the outline element of the current application. So obviously there's a condition that all those details will come forward subsequently as a later application. So they're not available at the moment, but it's clear that provisions have been put into place for that. There was an element in the objection again, an adjacent landowner says they do own part of this site. That relates to the existing pond here at the top end of the site. So the landowner owns the land further to the north of that area. This is again just some pictures showing you the existing water body that's there on the site. Finally, the replacement pitches themselves. So this is an area, it was formerly occupied as playing fields in connection with the now closed school adjacent, but obviously is in a condition now where it is definitely not suitable for sport. So this will be approved to an appropriate standard, so obviously team sports will be able to take place. Once this is in place, it's considered by ourselves that there will be an appropriate provision on the site. Has to be said, Sport England are still not of that view. But they've made a number of suggestions. For instance, the bike hub being sport, if that was moved to part of the site, that would be an offset. Well, we're getting the bike hub anyhow in the vicinity of the site. It doesn't really gain anything overall, but helps overcome their policy considerations. So what we are getting is a recreation facility and ultimately an adequate replacement of the playing fields to a standard that's needed. As the playing fields are located some distance, for instance, from the King's Road car park, and team sports will take place there, there will be obviously comings and goings of quite a few vehicles that would be associated with that. And the third element of concerns that have been expressed, and I think there's speakers who are going to comment on this element of it, is the provision of a car park on an existing area of open space just off Netherhay Street. Again, your options there are limited. If the playing fields go ahead, if we don't provide this car park, people will still come, they'll still arrive by vehicles, they'll still look for the closest location that they can stop. That would actually cause more congestion on Netherhay Street and the surrounding streets. So it doesn't actually resolve the problem. Obviously there will be a loss of open space there. It's approximately half of the existing space. The public footpath that links through from there and takes you onto the Snipe Clough area at the moment, that will still be retained, and additional tree planting will be provided on that area. So this is the car park in a little bit more detail. Again, some concerns have been raised about security issues, antisocial behaviour and so forth. So this car park will be locked, will only be available when the team games are taking place, and obviously will be locked thereafter. So it's not an area, for instance, that people will be able to drive on in the evenings and carry out malevolent activities and so forth. So provision again is made for that within the details of that site. As I say, a large area of the open space is maintained, but also, of course, this all ties in with the wider benefits of providing areas for people, a wider area of open space in the vicinity of the site, and providing easier access to be able to do that. So this is the pictures, so this shows you the open area at the moment. That's the footpath that I referred to that cuts through the site. So all this area on the left-hand side of the site, which is the eastern side, would be retained. This is Netherhay Street itself, so again, Netherhay Street, residential properties on there, but also the connecting streets that get you onto the main highway network, terraced housing and so forth. So any additional traffic that couldn't be accommodated on the site could have implications for those. The third main issue, to move on to the recommendation, is the green belt. And as I say, if we were looking at each of these individual elements in isolation, it may well be that we as officers would have concerns about them. But you have to take an holistic view of the whole development of the site. And the applicants made quite clear that it is important that each of those elements comes forward for the whole to actually be successful in the site. In terms of area of the site, even though some of these buildings are quite big, in terms of the overall area of the site, they are incredibly small. They are minor elements of built development take, and as I said earlier on, they've been designed to fit in with their setting and with the background of the site. But it's important, very special circumstances needed for greenbelt development. As you'll see in the report, it's considered there are economic benefits, there are environmental benefits, and there are definite social benefits of the scheme when taken as a whole, and those benefits clearly outweigh the kind of limited arm to openness of the greenbelt in the context of the wider development, and therefore that reason is considered acceptable. However, because it's a departure from, notwithstanding Sport England's objection, because it's departure from greenbelt policy and a major departure, again, it would have to be referred to Secretary of State for that particular purpose. So I think those are the three main issues to consider: greenbelt, playing field provision, and of course the issues that will be raised by others, I think, in relation to the proposed car park. So as I say, it has to be referred to Secretary of State. Secretary of State has 21 days to come back to us and decide whether she wishes to call the application in. But of course they also have the opportunity of putting an order on us not to determine the application if they want further time to determine that. If it comes back, then obviously it won't need to come back to committee. We then get authorisation for head of planning to issue that decision. I think I apologise for the mishaps, and I'm a bit sort of of that, but hopefully I've managed to encompass most of the important details for you, and obviously if you have some questions, I'll be pleased to answer those. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody got any questions regarding the presentation or what they have to say? Councillor Pythian.
The car park, the 22 spaces on the car park, is that the only car park for the whole development, or is there going to be more car parks? Because I should imagine that, you know, this development, once it's up and running, it'll be very, very popular, won't it? Yeah. And what about transport links? Is it in public transport links? Are they quite good as well to access it? Yeah. Thanks.
Is the nod enough, or do you want me to expand on that? Yes. Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? No. I'll just try and speak as loudly as I can, and I do apologise. There are 22 car parking spaces for the sports pitch, so it's a balance between, we know people will drive there because it's the closest place, so it's a balance between inviting lots and lots of people onto the car park and putting up with or dealing with indiscriminate parking on the nearby highway. So that's the best solution, we feel, to resolve the parking issues there. There are also pedestrian links across this site, so we're encouraging pedestrian and cycle links across the site, but to the site as well. So the sustainable modes of transport to the site will be obviously the public transport links that we've got in the wider area, and then we've made sure that there are good pedestrian links from the surrounding areas anyway. We've got an excellent public right-of-way network through the site, and we've got the cycle infrastructure network that will just extend. We only have to extend it slightly because it's already there, so it's in a good place for that type of travel. And there are car parking spaces and provision for coaches and coach drop-offs within the site as well.
Councillor Alan Downey.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the Sport England objections, and I'm looking at page 23, there's discussion of a feasibility study. They were asking for a feasibility study, it seemed like, and reference is made to no such feasibility study is brought forward. And if it wasn't clear to me from the report, who would be responsible for that? Is there a suggestion here that I couldn't work? Is it the council, the applicant that's responsible, and they haven't done it? Is Sport England responsible? And there seems to be a lack of information, and I couldn't work out who's not providing the information.
Mr. Dickman.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, it would be the applicant, and obviously the applicant is speaking later on, so perhaps he would want to address that particular issue for you.
So no further questions of the officers? If not, we go on to speakers. Initially, we've got an objector, Anne Ganderman. What happens is that you're allowed 3 minutes to speak. Just prior to the 3 minutes being up, you'll actually be given the information. Okay, so starting your own time, if you press the microphone button.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make clear that the comments refer only to the proposed car park on Nether Hay Street, not to the whole scheme as proposed by Northern Routes. Having lived on Nether Hay Street for almost 50 years, I can say without a doubt that the field in question is a great community resource. The field is well used by young people playing football and cricket, dog walkers, families enjoying picnics, and people taking a walk. OMBC regularly cut the grass so the field, so the field, which is surrounded by mature trees, looks tidy. This is a free, open space where family outdoor activities can take place. Why replace this space, which can be and is used by all the community, with a car park which will severely limit its use? There are concerns that should a car park be built, it will become a convenient area for fly tipping, already a significant problem in the area. It is also felt that a car park will provide a convenient meeting place for drug dealing and antisocial behaviour. As we can see from other car parks in the area, the proposed car park has the potential to become an area for dumping cars, being covered in litter and other detritus, which in itself could become a health hazard. There are concerns about highway safety with an increased number of vehicles turning into Nether Hay Street. Have the relevant road safety audits been carried out to see if there will be any detrimental effects on highway safety with vehicles accessing and egressing the proposed car park? The proposed car park is some distance from the main site in Site Clough. Would visitors use it? Within the plans there is a proposal to improve the playing fields at the bottom of Tate Street, and the Nether Hay Street site is meant for people using these fields. Could some space be found for a car park on these fields instead of on the Nether Hay Street site? The main objection is why take away what is an asset of community value, which is well used and appreciated by the people in the immediate area, and which also supports a variety of wildlife. To be honest,
30 seconds.
To be honest, for those of us who live near, the field aesthetically is much nicer to look at than a car park. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Has anybody got any questions of the applicant? No. I don't know whether Wendy wants to make any comments to what was asked.
So, with regard to the, can you hear me? Yeah, with regard to the, because we can hear ourselves on microphone, so we don't know if you can hear us or not. With regard to the safety of the entrance, that has been assessed, so I'm perfectly confident that people will be able to use the car park safely, and it's been laid out so that people can use it safely. I'm not really here to answer whether the car park should be there or not, because for me as the highway engineer it's serving the purpose of reducing congestion on the surrounding highway network.
Has anybody else got any questions of the objector? No? Okay then, if we go on to the speaker on behalf of the applicant, which is Mr. Ian Ford.
Thank you. The Northern Routes vision seeks to create the largest urban farm and eco-park in the UK, comprising growing, learning and leisure opportunities. The proposals take an underutilised asset and enhances the biodiversity and ecological value of the site, whilst creating opportunities to address the economic, health and well-being challenges of the area. It has been acknowledged that some of the proposals represent inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, but the abundance of social, economic and environmental benefits that have been set out in the application collectively outweigh the limited harm to the Greenbelt and represent the very special circumstances which justify development as per the NPPF. Sport England have objected to the application, as the proposals seek to develop in playing fields that would be replaced with market gardens, allotments and a solar array. It is important to note, however, that most of the playing fields have not been formally used in over 5 years, some now 10 years, and the NPPF clearly states that other recreational uses, which includes allotments under its definition of recreation, are permitted on existing playing fields. The solar array does not fall under this policy, but the loss is outweighed by the wide-ranging benefits that part of the proposals bring. Further allotments and market gardens will be developed on existing playing fields, but 2 new playing fields will be provided to balance out this loss. Overall, there will be no net loss of playing pitches and existing provision will be improved. Public objections have been submitted, most relating to the proposed new car park on Never Hay Street that will support these new playing pitches. The applicant has met with local residents and the local councillors since these objections, and since then the applicant has provided improved security measures to mitigate some of the initial concerns. The car park is considered safe from a highways perspective, supported by a detailed transport assessment, and therefore should not be a reason to refuse this consent. The car park location does not prevent people using the remaining land and, of course, the wider Northern Routes site. This part of the development will likely to be the last phase to be completed, and therefore the residents will have the improved amenity across the whole Northern Routes site, including improved pitches by the time this car park has been developed. Despite these small numbers of objections, the engagement with the general public and local stakeholders has been very positive, with over 1,400 individuals taking part in the numerous consultation exercises in person and online, and letters of support have been provided by Oldham Community Leisure and the local community charity Positive Steps. The project is further supported by the government as part of the Towns Fund programme. £6.1 million has been allocated to the Northern Routes project so far, and further funding has been sought through the recent Levelling Up Fund. So to conclude, the proposal provides a unique opportunity to create jobs, training and business opportunities for the local community, improve the health and well-being of local residents, whilst also protecting and enhancing the habitat, providing biodiversity, net gain and environmental value of the site. We therefore request you consider this unique and exciting proposal positively and award planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Ford? I think you mentioned some clarification about the swimming.
Well, yeah, with regards to there's a discussion of whether a feasibility study was needed in terms of the development of the pitches, and presumably with the assumption that there might be unseen costs and an issue with the development. So I was just, if you could explain kind of why there wasn't one, or if there is context to that I'm unaware of.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, the feasibility study was a general request from Sport England. It's not a requirement for the council to make a decision, only for Sport England to consider that further. We felt the justification we've provided so far was sufficient, and as the council have agreed with us, they consider that as well. And therefore, it was a request to consider the application further for Sport England, but it was not submitted. Full feasibility study was not submitted.
Is there any further questions, Councillor Surgeon?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ford, can I just ask, with the new playing pitches, how far will they be from the current location? As in, how many minute walking would it take for residents and young people to walk there? Thank you.
They are fairly close to the existing playing pitches. There are 2 playing pitches will still be remained. I'm not sure whether we can show on the plan if Mr. Dickman's able to quickly flick back. But to answer your question, we are talking about a couple of minutes of walking. So the 2 existing playing pitches, sorry Graham, you may need to be able to assist me here, are there on the cursor, and the pitches in place are further up to the top right. So we're talking about a maximum, I would say, a 5-minute walk with strong connection for public footpaths, etc. And the pitches it will be replacing are where the allotments to the south of the original pitches would be.
And in terms of the scale, is it obviously it's looking a bit small on the master plan? So is it of similar size or is it quite smaller?
It follows the guidance for the football pitches for suitable normal 11-a-side, and it's also considered how they could be used if it's not just standard 11-a-side. For example, children's pitches, etc., are smaller, so there's flexibility in that as well. So that we have followed the guidance for the size.
Councillor Allentine.
Thank you. There's a question from the objector about the location of the car park and alternatives. And she suggested that there might be alternatives available. Now, obviously, I don't have the knowledge of that. So could you just explain, is there a reason why it couldn't be relocated? Is there, what's the reason for it specifically being there?
The car park needs to be located close to the pitches. That's the reason for the car park. As Graham mentioned, the case officer mentions, it will be used solely for the car parking, with it being closed after hours before, and it will be managed that way. It's also needed to be considered for the land owned by the applicants, so that therefore limited factors. Conversations with the councillors were discussed. Conversations were discussed with the local councillors on the site visit, but none of any alternative options have come into fruition, and we have deemed that this is acceptable from a transport perspective, from a use perspective, and from a safety perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Pythian.
What security measures would you have in place to combat any potential antisocial behaviour that could occur?
Specifically on the car park?
No, on the whole development.
In general. This was asked similar to the last bike hub application. We feel this site is already in use by a number of people, and the Northern Routes project team monitor this site and use this site and already educate a lot of people. We feel the more uses, and the great uses here already proposed, will help provide more footfall to the site, providing natural surveillance. Therefore, that in itself will be will mitigate antisocial behaviour. We'll be creating more facilities on site, therefore fewer spaces for potential antisocial behaviour. As I mentioned, the team do an amazing job creating opportunities on site for people who visibly may be on the site causing nuisance, and I've witnessed it myself, and I honestly have. The team educating people, not simply shouting at them and telling them to run away, educating people on the spot. So that's a really positive experience. Of course, some of the main areas, the really high quality buildings with great architectural features. They will have security measures. Those are the traditional CCTV, some fencing where appropriate, and lighting will be in place. But we're hoping, as is the site at the moment, the fact that we're using the site more, there's greater activity on the site, it's a safer place for everyone.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, could I ask Councillor Harrison to contribute, please?
Thank you, Chair. Alex councillors are very supportive of the on the whole of the application of the visitors centre, all the associated infrastructure and the developments, because we believe that it will be a fantastic asset for Oldham people, offering a wide range of activities, opportunities and in a largely accessible setting. But tonight, on behalf of residents in our ward, in the Nether Hay Street area, we'd like to ask committee members to hold back on just one part of the application. I know we've been asked to look at it as a whole tonight, but that, of course, is the car park on Nether Hay Street, the application for that. And Anne here has said very eloquently just how much this piece of green land means to the local residents in a largely built-up area. So it's close to the northern routes and everything else, but it's the only green space in that particular neighbourhood, an otherwise very built-up area of Alexandra Ward. We know how much it's valued by the local residents for recreational purposes, for the visual enhancement of the neighbourhood, and it is used very widely. Local residents felt strongly enough about it to get up a petition. And well before any of this came to planning, we'd been in negotiations, or we'd been discussing with various bodies ways of actually enhancing this piece of ground to make it a better neighbourhood facility. And I think Councillor Mushtaq's got more information on that. And also we'd like to just hold back on the car park until other avenues, other possible options for car parking are looked into. And again, I think Councillor Mushtaq's got more to say on that. So it's just this one element on behalf of our residents in that area to think again about taking up a lovely piece of land that's well used and concreting over it to use it as a car park. We accept that there is need for car parking, but we don't feel that all avenues have been explored yet. Thank you.
Before I ask members if they want to ask questions, I'll ask Councillor Mushtaq just to contribute shortly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to contribute. Just to echo the points that have already been made, the overall scheme, even the residents are not opposed to. We think it's a fantastic scheme and it's going to be great for Oldham, and we've got one gem in our ward, which is the park, and this we believe will be another one. It is going to have a significant aesthetic impact on that area. That green, when I was a new councillor, newly elected, it was overgrown, and residents got in touch because they said, look, it's close. And I did have a conversation with them about the proximity of Alexandra Park. But the benefit of this is when you've got young children and you've got other responsibilities, it's much easier to have them playing locally and keeping an eye on them. And it is heavily used. I've seen that for myself. Residents can corroborate that as well. I do think the comments about the congestion, I'd actually approach it the other way. I think unless you know that area intimately, you wouldn't go down there to park to access those fields. I think the car park is going to attract extra vehicular activity. And I think the other thing we've not looked at is the proximity of other streets. So Tate Street itself, which leads on to Nether Hay Street. You've got Brook Lane, which would provide easy access, walking distance to those fields. The Alexandra Road car park, existing car park for the park, again, Brook Lane and Alexandra Road are either side of Alexandra Primary School. Both of those are walking distance. In the report, I forget where, there's also reference to Cherry Avenue, a car park there, and also Furness, which is on the other side. So I guess my plea to the committee is just on this one aspect. I mean, you know, there's a lot of intelligent people in this room. This is a massive scheme, multi-million-pound scheme. 22 car parking spots, 3 accessible and a coach. Are we honestly saying between us we can't find an alternative for this? I believe we can. We have extensive knowledge of the local area, and I believe we can find, we've already been working on it, but working together, I think we can. Just on the comments the colleague made earlier about the 1,400 people taking part in the consultation, that I agree, and it just goes back to the point that it's about the overall scheme, and there's massive support for the overall scheme. But for this element of it, there is significant objection for the right reasons and with good intention. So please do take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions of the councillors? I think my question would be, I think Mr Ford, on behalf of the applicant, said that consultations had already taken place and site visits with the councillors to explore other areas. And was those things that you mentioned just latterly considered?
So there's been some confusion on this, and I think I held my hands up when we met with the residents on one occasion with the officer where I think we missed an email, but a conversation was had where initially before the plans came forward about the prospect of a car park, and we did say we'd want to have a discussion with the residents, and an email did come out, and I hold my hands up, we did miss that email, but I think that was because we were under the impression a discussion would take place before this happened. That consultation didn't happen locally. The wider one obviously did with the 1,400 people, but the local one didn't, and that's why some of these suggestions. There was another one, so at the bottom of Skipton Street, there's a piece of land just behind the church. That's obviously, well, not obviously, you won't know the detail behind it, but it's not an option any longer. But again, that is something we were exploring.
Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for Councillor Harrison and Councillor Mushtaq. You said obviously you got support from residents against the sport field being turned into car park. Can I ask how many objections do you have from Nether Hay Street and the surrounding areas?
You've got that one. Should be in the pack, I think. It's 7, I think.
I think there's 7 objectors.
Yeah, but also, to be honest, I don't have the actual figure, but I think there's somebody in the public area tonight who contacts me regularly about issues in that area, and they were so upset about having this a good half, if not more, of this green space taken over by a car park that they did get a petition up against it. So I'm not sure how many people signed it, but yeah, there was quite a groundswell of feeling, and that, you know, we've become quite involved in that. I think initially we didn't fully understand the impact that the proposed car park would have, but we do know that, I can't put exact figures on it, but there are a lot of people. There's a Regenda housing estate to one side of it, there's young families and people of all ages. There's Nether Hay Street itself, and it's just a good facility for recreation and, as I said, visual enhancement, but I can't tell exactly how many people signed the petition at this
kids
point.
Kids going door to door as well. Kids were going door.
Yes, and yeah, we've been door to door and so forth. Yeah.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, you said that you had some sites in mind for the car park, but have you left it to this stage to be saying it, or have you been involved? Have you gone to officers and said, listen, you know, this bit of land we don't want being used as a car park. However, we have found this, that and the other.
So we did meet with the officer, and we did express with the residents as well, actually with some residents, because I wanted the officer to hear it from residents directly. And we walked across to another site, which the officer said, if we could get it, well, it doesn't belong to the council, it belongs to the church group. And the officer agreed that if it would be a suitable and acceptable site if we were to acquire it. Unfortunately, they've, for reasons, I think, because of the way, according to them, this has been handled, they're not happy to release that piece of land. So yeah, we have been active to answer your question, and we did, that was with the officer who met me on site and saw that potential site as well.
Okay, is there any, Councillor Williams, yes.
But that's the only site, there's no other site around there.
The other, well, as I said, the streets, Brook Lane, Tate Street, the access into it, surrounding streets, I don't think have been considered here. But the actual field, like Anne said, so if you look at the field, I have pulled it up on my map, there's a space before you get onto the field. And for the size of the car park, I think even if you had to go down a little bit further, there should be ample space there to create a car park on the street, which would actually be closer, because you'd park up and go straight onto the field. So I do believe, like I said, I mean, there's, you know, a lot of intelligent people in this room, and I can't see how we can't find a way of saving that green space for the local residents. And the one thing we missed out earlier is there were kids going round with that petition when they got wind of it, going door to door. They took the petition off Cheryl at the back there, and they were going door to door. And, you know, this is something I've seen and heard from residents myself.
I'd like Mr Richards to come in, but I think that we're in a slightly difficult position, that at this stage it's not usually the place of this committee to decide different elements of the development. We're looking at a proposal here holistically, but I'll ask Mr Richards to comment.
Yeah, Councillor Dean's stolen my thunder. That's essentially what I was going to say. Yeah, so I appreciate, obviously, first of all, the concerns that have been raised, and I appreciate what the ward councillors have raised in terms of the idea of almost holding back on one part of the application. To be clear, that's not an option that's open to you tonight. You can't approve part of the permission and not the rest. You have to look at it as a whole. So it's either refuse all of it on the basis of this one issue, if you think it's that significant, or it's approve all of it. And obviously we've the applicant's proposed various measures to try and address some of the concerns that have been raised. In terms of some of the matters that have been raised, or the concerns that have been raised, as I say, I do appreciate why the residents of Nether Hay Street and what have you may not particularly appreciate this car park proposal. However, I think we have to look at it in the round in terms of, as was mentioned before, this is the closest access point to those two new playing fields. So if there is no parking provision provided here, people will park on the road anyway. That is the nature of things. And so the reason for saying we need to put a car park here, specifically for the playing fields, is to ensure that the local roads are not clogged up with parked vehicles whenever there's a match on. So a car park is needed, and it has to be broadly in this location where this access would be off Nether Hay Street. In terms of alternatives, obviously that's been discussed quite a bit. There's no real alternative within the council's ownership. In terms of the suggestion to move it a bit further south, closer to the playing field, you still have an access through that public open space. So you still have to have a road down to that car park, so taking up some of that open space. And you'd also be removing a good number of trees that are already there to create that new car park right next to the playing pitch. So when you take all that in the round, and I would add as well that obviously while we recognise there is a loss of public open space immediately on Nether Hay Street, Tate Street area because of this car park, in the round of the whole application, accessibility to a fantastic open space is being created. And so that it's weighing up that loss of one small part of the open space with the wider benefit of it all, and that's what's the exercise before you tonight ultimately. So if the officers, as officers, we've given you a recommendation. We think this is the best solution for that particular parking problem. And in terms of everything else over the whole application, when you weigh it all in the balance, we consider and we recommend to you that it is worthy of approval as a whole.
If I could put the application out now for general discussion. Councillor Williamson.
Just before you do, I understand about you saying that it needs to be looked in the whole. Didn't you say that the Secretary of State, it goes to the Secretary of State? Yeah. Right, so could they write to the Secretary of State stating that whilst they agree with the application, there is one bit that is not right, and they think if they can come up with something more plausible for a car park or not?
So if the Secretary of State chooses to call it in, as we say, when it's referred to them, they are faced with the same decision as you. They have to decide the whole application. They can't just decide a bit of it and knock a bit of it back. So yes, if the Secretary of State does decide to call it in, they can make comments on the application, but it doesn't change the fact of how the Secretary of State has to decide the application in the whole.
Councillor Landani.
Thank you, Chair. So just thinking through that, this is the last phase that's going to come forward. If a suitable alternative was devised, would that then require subsequent planning permission to be applied for to change things, and is there any flexibility in the sort of conditions to put something in that would give flexibility to that, so if something were to come forward, or is it just it'd have to be a separate planning application?
Yes, it'd have to be a separate application. I think at this point in time, to try and deal with the car parking, which is quite a fundamental issue through condition, wouldn't be appropriate. We couldn't be comfortable, particularly from a highways point of view, that would result in the safe use of highways, because if there's no parking provision secured at this point in time, that issue of on-road parking would be of great concern to us.
Has anybody else got any conditions or anything? Could I suggest to committee anyway that we approve this, and if we do approve it, suggest that the parties go away and carry on the discussions, both the councillors and the community and the applicant, and it may be subject to a further application.
Second that.
But that's seconded. Would anybody like to speak on that? Councillor Allen.
Yeah, just to, I mean, I can see entirely where you're coming from. With the consideration of the application in the round, I don't, like, you'd end up with, the council would have to sue itself or challenge itself on the whole thing. So, you know, that's the only way I could see it going forward is further negotiation, and hopefully, you know, as the applicant would be amenable if a solution can be found to putting something else forward.
Mr. Richard.
Yeah, if I can just maybe clarify that in terms of what you suggested, Chair, we kind of break it into two parts. So one is the actual recommendation to approve this application with the conditions, and a separate motion to encourage, while we have time, because bearing in mind we have to allow time for the Secretary of State to potentially call it in, you know, those conversations can be held. And what have you.
I think there are two issues. It's just it's more or less rhetoric that we actually approved this application. We approved this application and then suggest afterwards that all the parties go away and have further discussion on that particular element of it. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on the application? Therefore, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour of approval, please show. Thank you. Thank you, that's unanimous, and thanks for everybody that's contributed. If we could go on to the next application tonight, which is land at Broadway Green Business Park, Foxdenton Lane, and it's an application for a store for Aldi. And Mr. Gill's going to do the presentation. Okay, Mr. Gill, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So, firstly, I'd just like to make members aware, since the agenda was published, the Council has received some additional representations, including 44 letters of support, an objection from Martin Robeson Planning Practice on behalf of Tesco, and a response to that objection from Averson Young. The representations from both Martin Robeson and Averson Young and the summary of the points raised are contained in the late list. So please take the time, just have a look at that late list because it does contain some important information. So if anybody can't hear me, just shout up and let me know. Okay. So first, the second point I'd like to raise is we have Richard Shepherd from Nexus Planning with us tonight, who has been assisting the council with retail matters on the application. Richard specialises in retail planning and he's here to answer questions should any members have any questions on retail matters through the process. So I'll just talk through the scheme briefly. So the scheme is a hybrid planning application. It comprises a full application for a new Aldi food store and an outline application, all matters reserved, for a commercial unit to be used as a coffee shop, bakery or a restaurant type facility. The application falls within the Foxdenton Business Employment Area. The site forms part of the wider area granted planning permission in 2013 for a mixed-use development comprising employment uses and residential development. As part of that approval, the application site forms part of phase C1 and was designated for employment uses. Okay. So the current application is a resubmission of a previous application for the same proposed development, and which was refused in Planning Committee in February of this year. The reason for refusal is set out in full on the slide above there, if everyone can see it. And essentially a summary of that is it was concluded that the development did not comply with Local Plan Policy 14, as it was previously considered by Planning Committee that the development did not provide high quality business and industrial development as the policy states should be provided at the site. In addition, it was also considered that the previous submission did not justify a departure from Policy 14 through any of its exceptions listed and in the policy for being able to do so. This will be discussed later in the presentation. However, before moving on to that, I'll just provide an overview of the current scheme. So this is an aerial view of the site. So the site itself is surrounded by a mixture of uses, including residential development directly to the south, which is phase R2, and has been largely constructed now by Redrow Homes. Commercial development to the north, which is also comprises part of phase C1, which is now in construction phase. A large warehouse is now under construction, nearly complete from what I understand, and that's situated to the north. And a new linear park, which is also situated to the east. So this is a proposed site plan of the food store on the layout. The food store will be situated on the eastern and southern boundaries. Car parking with 124 spaces will be provided. And in terms of service and deliveries, this will be carried out on the eastern side of the food store. Pedestrian access will be gained from two linkages which are situated to the north and the west. And in terms of the commercial unit, the specific layout of this is a reserved matter and is not being considered as part of this application. So you're only considering sort of the principal elements of that. So as you can see, so the servicing arrangements are on the eastern side. You can see how it's the position of the food store on the southern boundary and the commercial unit on the western boundary there. And obviously you can see the pedestrian linkages coming in from the north and the western side of the site itself. So the design of the building has a contemporary appearance, as you can see, and we use a combination of black brickwork and anthracite and silver cladding panels, which complements the commercial uses that will be delivered north of the site. And the building is 8 metres in height, which is significantly lower than the 16 metres approved in principle for the site in 2013. So the submitted landscaping shows planting of 29 new trees across the site with native hedge planting, shrub planting and wildflower. 13 of those new trees will be situated on the southern boundary between the development and the property south of the site. No objections have been raised to the landscaping proposed by either the Arboricultural Officer or Greater Manchester Ecology Unit. So as you can see, there's some planting there just south on the Aldi, on the boundary of the Aldi between the residential development south and the proposed food store. Landscaping on the western boundary is reserved matter, but obviously if we do receive a reserved matters for that particular application, we would deal with landscaping as well, and we probably would encourage that further planting on that southern boundary if it was submitted. So really what probably committee want to hear is what's changed with the previous application which was refused in the current application. So one of the key points in the previous application and the reason for refusal centred on a perceived lack of compliance with Local Plan Policy 14. So Local Plan Policy 14 was a key factor in the previous application's refusal. It does list some exceptions in Policy 14 in which development may be acceptable that does not comply with the policy. This can be demonstrated through a marketing exercise, which proves that there is no demand for the uses that are acceptable for the site, or B, through a viability appraisal to show that the acceptable uses for the site are unviable, and C, by demonstrating that an alternative use will benefit the regeneration areas in need of investment. So essentially, the applicant would need to meet the exceptions, one of the exceptions in Policy 14 to overcome the reason for refusal in our view. So the first change between the previous and the current submission is that the applicant has submitted information that in their view addresses all 3 exceptions. Following a review of that information, the Council is satisfied that enough information has been submitted to trigger Local Plan Policy Exception A, marketing. The applicant has submitted an employment land marketing report which confirms that the site has been marketed for over an 8-year period through a dedicated website, marketing brochures, marketing agents and site marketing boards. As a result of the marketing undertaken, only one serious interested party was ever identified, but this party ultimately chose not to pursue the site due to its configuration and proximity to the houses south of the site. The marketing report goes on to conclude that the characteristics of the site are such that the commercial employment development is unlikely to be achieved. This is because of the size of the site, its configuration and proximity to the houses south of the site. So this slide basically shows you the difference between the layout of the current scheme and the previous scheme. So another change that was made of the current scheme is that the store has been reorientated so that the servicing area is now shielded further away from the properties on Cavalier Square. So one of the key considerations and concerns raised in the previous application, albeit it wasn't a reason for refusal, was the proximity and location of the servicing area and its proximity to the properties on Cavalier Square. So the applicant has looked at that and reorientated the store so that it's shielded further away from that. But I'll just talk through that now with you. So this slide shows a relationship of the current submission, specifically the southern elevation of the food store, to the properties on Cavalier Square. As with the previous application, a noise assessment was submitted with this application, which considered the potential impacts of servicing and plant equipment in its current orientation, so as submitted as part of this application. The noise assessment concluded, even without mitigation, that the development would have a low impact. As set out in the committee report, the applicant is also proposing some mitigation measures to help maintain residential amenity. And these include 1, an enhanced landscaping scheme that will be delivered on the southern boundary, which we've already discussed. 2, a proposal for an acoustic fence, details of which will need to be agreed with the Council and Environmental Health. And 3, details of an appropriate lighting scheme, which will need to be agreed with the Council prior to implementation. In relation to the commercial unit, A further noise assessment will be required and an air quality assessment will also be required. Both of these documents will consider any impacts on residential amenity when the layout of that scheme is fixed. So at the moment it's not appropriate to do the noise and air quality assessments because the layout's not fixed for that part of the site, it's only an outline. So when that comes in as part of the reserve matters, we would expect to see that information so we can adequately assess it. Overall, in our view, as with the previous scheme, residential amenity would not form the reasonable basis to refuse this application. So this slide just shows a site section of the site. Obviously, in the committee report, it does discuss there is a level difference between the properties on Cavalier Square and the site itself, and I think this site section just gives members an understanding of what that would actually look like on the ground. As you can see, I can't move the cursor, these would be the properties on Cavalier Square, that relationship here, and obviously you can see the height of the Aldi store at 8 metres is not too dissimilar to what a normal two-storey property would be. So I hope that provides some clarity on that point. So as part of the late list, a detailed representation was submitted to the Council by Martin Robes in Planning Practice on behalf of Tesco. In relation to the concerns raised in the objection, our concluding comments on this are as follows. So we have dealt with these representations in detail in the late list. I'm not going to repeat myself because obviously it's all that details in the late list. But in summary, the Council has, in our view, interpreted and applied Local Plan Policy 14. Fox Denton is a business employment area and the policy does not explicitly omit Fox Denton from being considered in the exceptions in the policy. So we, in our view, we've applied this policy correctly, despite assertions from Martin Robes and Planning Practice, and the reasons for that are set out in the late list. So 2, the marketing evidence submitted is considered acceptable by the Council and is considered to trigger the exception of Local Plan Policy 14. In relation to the concerns raised on the level of marketing evidence submitted, again by Martin Robes and Planning Practice, and how that has been assessed. So they've raised representations on the the quality of the marketing evidence submitted and how that's been assessed. However, what is key here, there is no local or national policy requirement which sets out a specific criteria for what marketing evidence should be submitted. In addition, there is no local or national policy requirement which states that this information should be assessed by a third party to confirm its acceptability. The Council are satisfied that the market evidence submitted and this, in the Council's view, addresses the previous reason for refusal. And 3, in relation to concerns raised on the sequential assessment submitted by the applicant, this information has been robustly and independently assessed by Nexus Planning, who specialise in retail planning. Nexus confirmed that the application is acceptable in retail terms and there is no reasonable basis to refuse the application on retail grounds. So just really in conclusion, so in coming to a recommendation on this application, we have carefully considered the planning balance. For the reasons set out in the committee report and the late list, we conclude that the development meets exception A of Local Plan Policy 14 and therefore complies with the policy as a result. And this is considered to address the previous reason for refusal. In addition, the development does have some benefits which include job creation. The food store alone will create 40 to 50 full-time and part-time jobs. And I've had nothing to the contrary to suggest that that Aldi would not work with the council as part of, helping get those jobs to local people. Number 2, the proposal will play a crucial role in enhancing consumer choice in Chadderton, specifically on the Fox Denton site. As we know, the wider site has planning permission for 500 units and a substantial amount of employment floor space. The proposed food store will not only provide for weekly shops, but also convenient shopping throughout the week. The commercial unit could also provide convenience food and drink uses for both residents and employees in the immediate area. 3, the retail impact assessment submitted with the application demonstrates that Aldi Food Store will claw back 3.45 million of convenience expenditures to the area from other Aldis in Oldham, situated outside the primary catchment area of the site. And 4, and this is a pretty important point really, if B2 and B8 uses were implemented at the site, as it's got planning permission for, these could involve heavy industrial 24-hour operations. In contrast, this application proposes a single-storey building restricted by condition, limiting hours of operation and servicing, and a commercial unit which will be subject to the same restrictions. Furthermore, the proposed food store building would be half the height of what is approved for the site. It is therefore considered that the proposal would likely have a lesser impact on nearby residents when compared to a B2 and B8 type of use. Overall, given the evidence submitted in relation to the marketing and the benefits identified, it is for those reasons that the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gill. Has anybody got any questions of Mr Gill? Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, just a quick question. So, compared to the previous scheme, I know you said it's half the size of in terms of height, and they've changed the orientation. But in terms of floor space, because on the picture it seemed a bit smaller, was that to scale or was that just a demonstration?
Yeah, it's just a demonstration. The floor space created is the same as the previous application. They've essentially reorientated the store so to kind of shield the servicing area away from the residents on Cavalier Square. So the actual retail floor space being created is exactly the same as the previous application. They've essentially reorientated the store.
And can you just go back to this slide with the map on, please? Yeah, that one, yeah. So you know where the red square is on the proposed map? Can you just clarify what that is?
That's the commercial unit, so that's kind of an indicative layout. So that's not something that's being considered in full at this stage. So it's what would be the commercial unit. It's nothing to do with the food store. So the layout of that would be considered as part of the reserve matters. So the layout of that, as you see now, would not be approved, so to speak. It would be subject of a reserve matters application.
Just to clarify on that and add to it, so when we say commercial in this context for the outline, we're talking about the uses you listed before were bakery, cafe, and restaurant, was it?
Yeah, those are the uses, yes.
So what all we're asking you to consider tonight in relation to that is, in principle, in outline, is that acceptable? If it's approved, then further down the line there will be a reserve matters application with a detail of precisely what use, what design of the building and parking and what have you for it.
Have we got any further questions from members before we bring in the speakers? No? Okay, if I could initially ask Mike Hollis, is it, to speak on behalf of the objectors?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'm Mike Hollis, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of a group of residents at Cavalier Square and Henrietta Court in objection to the application proposal. Councillor Moores will address you on the residential amenity aspects. I'm going to concentrate on 3 points of planning principle. First point of planning principle, the importance of consistency in decision making, emphasised by the Court of Appeal in the North Wiltshire case. It doesn't mean that it's impossible for like cases not to be decided alike. But if you come to a different conclusion now than you did in February, you're going to have very, very good reasons indeed for that change of condition. And the reason that's important is that it's fundamental to securing public confidence in decision making. Second point, as I emphasised last time, the development plan is the statutory starting point. There is here a clear departure from policy 14. You're fully aware that the uses proposed are B1, B2, B8 and up to 25% residential. There is an exceptions policy. Last time officers were advocating exception C, this time, sorry, A, this time it's C. But those exceptions are a very high hurdle. There's got to be no realistic prospect of the employment uses. And similar language is used in the National Planning Policy Framework 122, no reasonable prospect. And that's unlikely given, you know, what's happening, say, right just the other side of Lydia Becker Way. Plot 3000 is coming forward. It's got full planning permission in February for small employment uses. Third point I want to address you on is the planning balance. Your officer has emphasised the Aldi jobs, consumer choice, clawback of expenditure and the potential fallback position. On the jobs, they're not new jobs in retail. There's no growth in food and groceries expenditure. Consumer choice, yes, the government does want that. It wants it in the town centre, in Chadderton town centre. The clawback is overestimated, and it's no good anyway if there's no spin-off benefits for the town centre. And the fallback, the 16 metres high, was merely a parameter drawing. That's not really realistic, so not much weight to that. Set aside that, the loss of an absolutely part of your jewel in the crown employment site and the harm to Chatterton Town Centre. It might not be a significant adverse harm, but it's still a negative in the planning balance sheet. And I'm not convinced personally that the sufficient flexibility has been shown to make use of the opportunity to the rear of the Chatterton Reform Club. So I urge you, as you did last time, to do your duty and to refuse this harmful application. Nothing has changed.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis. Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Hollis? If not, if we could ask, Mr. Stuart Parks to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good evening. I'm Stuart Parks, Property Director for Aldi Stores. The comprehensive report before you addresses the main issues and recommends approval. I won't duplicate Officer's positive comments, but there are some matters that merit emphasis. Firstly, whilst we acknowledge that a food store may not have originally been envisaged for the application site, the reality is that it has been marketed extensively for industrial purposes since 2013 without success. In such circumstances, the local plan looks positively on alternative uses, and the proposal before you represents an ideal solution for this employment site. I say this for three key reasons. Firstly, I can confirm that Aldi will create at least 40 new jobs, and these will be targeted at local people via our work with organisations such as Job Centre Plus. The second unit will also provide a range of jobs, whilst delivery of the scheme will generate temporary construction jobs. The overall investment value of the project will be over £5 million. Secondly, the scheme is deliverable. If Aldi are granted planning permission today, our intention is to have the food store open and trading for customers within 18 months. The past 8 years of unsuccessful marketing efforts offer no guarantee that an industrial scheme will ever come to fruition on the site. Thirdly, providing the food store here will be of unquestionable benefit to the future operation of the business park. It will provide a focal point, generating activity and footfall, and helping to create an environment where people want to work and invest. It is therefore clear that the job creation and economic investment value of the scheme is entirely reflective of the Council's objectives for locations such as Broadway Green, which are tasked with furthering the local economy. In terms of other matters, being a good neighbour is very important to us, and we have worked hard with your officers to ensure any potential residential amenity impacts are mitigated. As per previous requests, we have reorientated the store, included specialist acoustic fencing and a landscaping bund along the boundary with properties to the south. Planning conditions will also control hours of operation and servicing, and I can confirm no objection from your environmental health officer. I know there has been speculation locally that the scheme's second unit might become a fast food restaurant. However, I can categorically state that this use has not been applied for, and a planning condition will restrict the unit to the type of coffee shop, sandwich shop or bakery that you would expect to see in a business park the size of Broadway Green. Finally, I want to highlight that there are no outstanding objections to our application from any statutory consultees. It has been reviewed on the Council's behalf by a specialist retail policy advisor who has found the scheme acceptable. It also benefits from 44 representations of support from local people. We would therefore ask that members follow the officer recommendation to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions of the applicant? No? If not, could I ask Councillor Morris to address? He's speaking on, as a ward councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the ward councillors and also on behalf of residents of Cavalier Square and the adjoining streets on the estate known as Fox Fields. The ward councillors have been contacted by a number of residents on the estate and have held several meetings in order to discuss the application to develop an Aldi supermarket in very close proximity to their houses. Many stated that they would not have purchased their homes if they had been given any indication that such a proposal was to be considered. In the report, the committee much emphasis is placed on policy 14. The Foxtenton site has provision for B1, B2 and B8 with up to 25% residential with no exception. However, it appears there might be an exception in which it may be possible to depart from the policy. For example, exception C, which suggests that demonstrating an alternative use that would benefit the regeneration of an area in need of investment as identified by the council and the community may be acceptable. Prior to the original application being received by the council, many residents of Chadderton had indicated that they would like to see a much improved retail offer in Chadderton Town Centre. But there had been no suggestion that there was a need for a supermarket in the area of Foxtenton. Foxtenton, or Broadway Green as it is now called, is a key strategic site and it has an important role in delivering both residential and commercial development in Oldham. When the previous application was considered, it was apparent that the application did not meet the criteria for an exception to policy 14. To put it simply, the proposed alternative use as retail did not meet the criteria for an exception as outlined under C. It was never agreed with the council in advance that the site is within an area in need of investment and that the proposal will benefit the community. In simple terms, again, the application represents a breach of policy 14. With regard to the current application, the emphasis has shifted to exception A, marketing. An employment land market report has been submitted to support the applicant's case. The report noted the close proximity to the residential development of phase R2 also put off potential B2 and B8 occupiers due to the concerns over the limits on noise and hours of operation that this proximity to residential would require. The Employment Land Market report advised that the site had been marketed since 2013. One serious interested party was identified, however they choose not to pursue the site due to its configuration and proximity to housing on phase R2. Little further interest has been received. The report concludes that there is little prospect of any industrial commercial interest in this site now or in the future. It is disappointing to note, therefore, that it is deemed to be appropriate to impose a supermarket in very close proximity to housing, with the potential problems of noise, light pollution, deliveries outside of opening hours, with consequent loading and unloading, together with some fumes and odours. It would seem unreasonable to seek to vary designations under Policy 14 in order to inflict this development on residents, when other interests have been previously recognised that the potential problem that would be experienced by residents. With regard to Policy 14, it is worth noting that other sites on Greengate and Greenside Way continue to attract interest from developers. This trend can be noted through applications previously approved and currently being considered by Oldham Council Planning. The ward councils would suggest, therefore, that Policy 14 should not be breached and that further efforts should continue to be made to utilise a site for industrial/commercial development. In a wider context, the committee are being asked to agree to surrender employment land while other potential employment sites in Oldham have been lost. It would be hard to justify surrendering employment land when the council is also being asked to allocate or redesignate parts of the green belt for employment purposes. The report also makes reference to the fact that the proposed Aldi development would create 40 to 50 new full and part-time jobs. Whilst it may be possible to argue that employment opportunities are still being created, it is worth considering this is in the context of employment as a whole. Given the current situation relating to the food retail market and the rising cost of living, it is probable that Aldi attracts shoppers from elsewhere in Chadderton and beyond. The market share of other retailers would fall in real terms, result in the probability of jobs being lost elsewhere. So it does not necessarily follow that there will be an overall increase in the level of employment, just a redistribution of existing employment opportunities. The Ward Council has asked Avison Young on behalf of Aldi to consider redesigning the site to ensure that the loading bay is not directly behind the residential properties on Cavalier Square and Henrietta Court. Initially, this suggestion was ignored, but after the original application was refused, this was reconsidered and the site has been slightly modified. That being said, the residents are still faced with the prospect of loading and unloading taking place outside the proposed opening hours within close proximity to the rear of their houses. It is noted that the design does include acoustic fencing and additional landscaping, but deliveries are still likely to prove a source of disturbance, especially for those with young families. It could be argued that appropriate conditions would be attached to the application. However, if the application is approved, the residents will be faced with the need to continue to monitor nuisance caused, such as noise and light pollution and out-of-hours deliveries. I would also ask that you consider some of the reasons offered in support of the proposal that do not seem to be realistic. In their response to the original submission by Hollis Vincent on behalf of the residents, Nexus confirmed that Aldi would have a relatively narrow retail offer and residents will still have to visit the town centre to source other goods and services. Given that residents still have to travel to Chadderton Town Centre or elsewhere to complete other aspects of their shopping, if this proposal was to be granted, it would not necessarily reduce the carbon footprint or promote the green agenda. When the original application was considered, that is the one in 2013, a section 106 which was concluded, which made reference to £150,000 being made available to support the introduction of public transport along the Spinal Road, Lydia Becker Way, for up to 3 years. It is unlikely that public transport will be introduced before the residential, industrial and commercial elements have been more fully developed. However, it does illustrate the point that for shoppers without access to a car, they will find Aldi a challenge without available transport, whereas both Oldham and Chadderton town centres and elsewhere are accessible by public transport. Therefore, this development would potentially be adding to travel and undermining the green agenda. To emphasise the point, I would draw your attention to some work being carried out by Halsall Lloyd Partnership Planning Consultants. This work is being funded through the Oldham Council Local Improvement Fund to reimagine Chadderton Town Centre. And at this point, I would draw your attention to page 18 of the late list in the section headed The Suitability and Availability of the Land at the Rear of the Chadderton Reform Club. This work is intended to revitalise Chadderton Town Centre and is based on a 15-minute neighbourhood, which identifies comfortable walking distances of 400 metres in 5 minutes, 800 metres in 10 minutes and 1.2 kilometres in 15 minutes respectively. Research also shows the optimum distance that people are generally prepared to walk to facilities is 800 metres, and shopping area developers use 400 metres as the distance people will walk with shopping. This evidence would suggest that the vast majority of those who might use Aldi would arrive by car and, as stated previously, still be faced with having to complete the remainder of their shopping elsewhere. On balance, it could be argued that there are strong grounds for refusing the application. In the light of some of the issues outlined in the report, the anger and frustration expressed by residents of Cavalier Square and the adjoining streets appear to be justified. There is little merit in the application, Much should be gained from considering the whole exercise from a different standpoint. The ward councillors recommend that the application be refused on the grounds that it breaches Policy 14 and does not support the reduction of the carbon footprint or contribute towards promoting the green agenda. In addition, it does not contribute to the improvement of Chaddington Town Centre, and little has changed since the previous application was considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moores. Has anybody got any questions of Councillor Moores? Councillor Pithing.
Councillor Moores, how close is the actual supermarket to residential developments then?
That might be better shown on the plan, I don't, for distance.
I think the answer is adjacent.
It's adjacent
Right.
too, but if you're asking for an exact measurement of...
But it's pretty close then?
Yeah, pretty close, yeah.
I think it's just a little over 20 metres.
Has anybody else got any questions of Councillor Moores? Yes.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, I have sympathy for this point around departure from policy, and that the application may not represent a preferred way forward, if you will. But I just wonder what yourself and local residents and ward councillors think would be the outcome of another round of engagement looking for a more suitable use, because I'm unsure as to how another round of engagement would reap any different outcome to ones that have come before, really.
That's open to lots of things, whoever came forward, but across the way, on the other side of the Rebecca Way, they're developing smaller units, commercial units, industrial units, for smaller businesses. They're not all going to be huge warehouses, so something more sympathetic to the area. Yeah.
Yes, Kathleen.
So, just to follow up from that then, if interest has been taken in sites across the way and that's moved forward, is there not therefore a reason why that same interest hasn't been applied for this particular plot of land?
I cannot answer that. I'm not involved in the marketing. I'm sorry.
Has anybody else got any questions? No? If not, we'll... sorry?
Can I make some comments?
Yes, Mr. Richard.
Okay, I probably have to ask the committee's patience with me at the moment, because I think there's a few things that have been raised by Mr. Hollis and by Councillor Moores that I feel I have to address and make sure you have if you like, both sides of the argument. So there's a few points to go through. So first of all, there's concern raised about consistency of decision making, and I understand that perspective. However, as you'll have heard me said before from here before, that every application has to be considered on its own merits, and ultimately, even where you are comparing to the previous application, the question we're all having to ask ourselves about this application is, what is different? What has changed, particularly in relation to the reason for refusal for the last application, that would possibly mean we need to consider this application differently from the last one? Okay, so the point about consistency is relevant to a point, but we have to look at this application and the information that's been submitted to us for this application. I think just to clarify as well a point that was made about what was the officer view on the last application compared to this application around the exceptions. Just to clarify a mistake, an error that was made there in the statements. In the previous application, the applicant suggested that exception C had been met, but the officer report did not agree with that. And of course that is ultimately where the committee ended up in terms of the reason for refusal against policy 14, because none of the exceptions had been met. This time around, while the applicant, now having done more work on marketing and viability of employment uses on the site, has now suggested that all three exceptions are met. From an officer point of view, we have said that only exception A is met, But that's okay because it's an either or with the exceptions. It's not a case of meeting all the exceptions as long as only one of them has been met. And our recommendation is that exception A has been met because the marketing evidence is now before us, that it wasn't with the last application. There's been a few comments around other sites coming forward for employment in the area, and why can't this therefore be assumed to be coming forward for employment? And I think actually the point Councillor Lancaster just made was very relevant in that point. It is that there is an argument to say that the very fact that there hasn't been employment interest on this site, apart from one potential end user who then withdrew their interest because of the proximity of the residential units, shows why this particular application site is different from other phases of the Foxtonton development that are coming forward for employment, or indeed why the development on the main industrial estate at Greengate. Very different context. I think there was a comment made around that the height of the employment unit that has outline permission through the 2013 permission on this site was not set, and so it's not a fair comparison. It's true that it wasn't fixed in that way, but the point is the principle has been allowed on this site for an employment unit that would be much larger than what is before you tonight in terms of the Aldi's proposal for a food store. And that is a relevant consideration. That could come forward and in principle be granted permission if there was an interest for that kind of use. Yeah, I think I've addressed that point already. In terms of the point around loss of employment land when there was greenbelt being proposed for release for employment elsewhere, again, we acknowledged that point at the last application, and it is still relevant tonight. We're not moving away from that. It is simply the fact that while in an ideal world this site would come forward for employment as we all originally planned in the core strategy, circumstances have changed. And in the late information we make reference to what the National Planning Policy Framework says about protecting employment sites when there is no realistic prospect for them to come forward for employment anymore. And that we have to consider alternative uses in that situation if there's no realistic prospect. And you can't just protect employment land ad infinitum. There comes a point where you have to look at the market context and say, okay, the situation has changed. In terms of public transport access and the suggestion that there's better alternative sites and a town centre location would be better, I would not disagree that if there were sites available and suitable, a town centre location would be preferred. But that's why the sequential test process has been gone through, and there are no suitable sites available. I know they've been put forward and suggested by others, but on an assessment, including by our retail consultant, there are no other suitable alternatives in terms of the right size, the right location and positioning that would actually attract a supermarket to want to set up shop, literally, in such a location. And so, yeah, ideally, you would want it in a location where there is even better public transport access than there is on this site. But those who do use public transport or do rely upon public transport to do their food shops, the other alternatives, such as the other stores in the area, in the town centre, are still going to be there. They still have that choice. They still have that access to a food store. And so in the context where there's no alternative sites that are more suitable in a more sustainable location, it can be acceptable to allow a food store where the public transport access maybe isn't as good as we would want it to be. And finally, there's been a few comments around that this is no new jobs. This is just about a redistribution of jobs. And I would remind your members that if you have any questions, say we do have Mr Shepherd here as our retail consultant who can probably address this point even better than me. But I do feel that's a bit disingenuous to talk about it in that way. We're not talking about because this food store opens, another food store closes. Those other food stores, many of which are already over trading, as in they have more customers than they're planned for, if you like, they will still be there. They will still have jobs in those shops. And so a new store is adding new jobs in the area. And I think that's an important point to raise. So I think that'll do for now. Thank you for bearing with me on it. I suppose one final thing just to bring to the fore now is while we've had a wide-ranging discussion, and that's always very welcome, and it's the right thing to do, and it is a new application. Again, bearing in mind the decision that was already made 6 months ago, there was only one reason for refusal in that decision, and that was related to Policy 14. So the question, as I've mentioned, is is that reason for refusal still relevant, or is the evidence before you tonight with this changed application change your mind or your view on that reason for refusal? But also, you have to be very careful about reintroducing any other reasons for refusal that were considered last time but not included. Because, and again, unless there's a change in position, a change in situation in relation to what you're seeing tonight, that would be inconsistent decision making to introduce a new reason for refusal that you didn't have last time. So I hope that all makes sense, but I'll shut up for a little bit.
Could I open it up for a general discussion, the application? Does anybody want to contribute at all? Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Moores for your contributions and the residents and everybody else. However, I do feel that, for example, on page 2 of the late list, there's a number of residents that are in support of this scheme. And I think given that Aldi have previously, obviously gone, with the rejection of the previous one, they've come back, made changes and added more. I do feel like they've taken into consideration what we've previously said. And as the officers have mentioned, they do meet one of the exceptions. Therefore, I am inclined to move for approval and recommend the officers' recommendation. Thank you.
Is that seconded? Sorry? Yeah. Councillor Allen-Downey, do you want to contribute?
It's mainly been covered. The only thing is that exception on Policy 14. I haven't heard anything from any of the other discussions that seems to suggest that there is another reason for refusal. If there was, I'd missed it. And the marketing exercise, there's been a suggestion that it might not be good enough, but not anything concrete, nothing substantial enough for me to be able to say that weighs in favour of saying that exception has not been met. So I would agree with Councillor Serja.
Is there any further contributions or comments? It's been moved and seconded for approval then. Just checking there's no further comments. Those in favour of approval, please show. Thank you. Those against? 2 against, and I'll abstain on the issue. In the light of the vote, the development is approved. Thank you. If we go now to the last item on the agenda, which is for noting, and that's the item on appeals. Anybody got any questions or observations on them? No? It's just an update to keep people informed anyway. If not, thank you very much for your attendance and your contribution, and I'll close the meeting.